like to go ahead and welcome Ms. Musa Mpofu. She will be the moderator for this session, all the way from South Africa. She moderated an earlier session, and I know she is ready to just make sure that the conversations that we have with the panelists around global trade are very insightful and engaging. So again, thank you, Musa, very much for moderating this session, and the stage is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, welcome to everybody who is still here joining us. We are excited to definitely have you. And we look forward to engaging with you as we discuss how global trade as a catalyst to the development of Africa. But before we dive into the topic, I'd just like to thank you again, Anne, for giving me this opportunity to navigate this conversation as I also learn on the topic. And then also just to thank the organizers of the Africa Trade Conference, thanking Regal Africa Business Institute, Regal Africa Center for International Trade, and the Elite Global Branding. It's really been a very informative day as we spoke about the AFCFTA earlier on and have now just started talking about global trade. Well, this is the last session of the day. We haven't just started talking, we've been talking about it. And so on this panel with me now, I think I saw her earlier on, we have Rachel Mwakazi. Is it Rachel or Raquel? I'm not sure, you will correct me. She's the Director of Mango Development. Then we have Hanna Norberg, President for TradeExperettes. Then we have Ben Shepherd. Is Ben here? I'm not sure if I've seen him yet today. But on the panel, we should have Ben Shepherd, who is a principal at Developing Trade Consultants. And finally, we have John Karegwa, or Ben is here. Then we have John Karegwa, who is the CEO at Investment in Africa Summit. Good afternoon to you all, colleagues. I'm not sure where in the world you are. Good afternoon, good morning, good day.
Good evening.
Good morning for me. Nice to see everyone.
Wow, this is fascinating. Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Is it Rachel or Raquel? Just so that I get that right. Your sound is not very clear, Rachel. I'm not sure why.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, but it's quite distant.
Oh, I wonder why. Let's hope it gets better.
Okay, well, while you try and work that out, thank you all for joining me as we navigate the conversation on how we as Africans can make global trade an enabler for development in Africa. So I'll ask you guys to introduce yourselves. And as you do introduce yourself, please tell us about who you are, where you are, the work you do, and how that work contributes to capacitating African traders in global trade. We can start off with you, Raquel.
Okay, hi. Much more clearer now?
Well, I can hear you. I hope the audience can hear you too.
I hope so too. Okay, my name is not an issue, how it's pronounced, don't worry. Yes, I'm a mother, wife, and a believer and a leader. I particularly love working in rural areas. As a social innovator, I enjoy looking at the possibilities of creating sustainable jobs and wealth creation because I'm passionate about the potential and future of SMEs, cooperatives, and cottage industries, especially in value addition of agricultural goods and in the manufacturing sector of fast-moving consumer goods. And I'm happy to be in this forum for today, because I believe that trade is very crucial in the development of Africa, as we look at more of the opportunities and move away from our continent that is always branded as one which is having problems and has to be so highly dependent. I believe we have so much untapped opportunities, especially in the rural agri communities that really make the bigger part of Africa. Yeah, we'll get to know each other and discuss more along the line. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Raquel. I think I'll just call you Raquel for the conversation. Then we move on to you, Hanna. Welcome.
Thank you so very much for that, Musa. Thank you for holding us all together. I can see that this is going to be a little bit like herding cats. And so I'm so glad that you took that job on. Thank you so much, Anne, for inviting us. So I know Anne for the TradeExperettes. So my name is Hanna Norberg, and I'm calling in from Sweden here today. And so I'm an independent trade policy advisor. And so I work with the policymakers who I would say sort of make the rules for the road. Rules of the road for those who do the trade. And I also work with researchers, and I do my own research. So I just recently did a study on the AFCFTA on the environmental effect on air pollutions, for example. And then together with Ben, I also work to bridge the gap between researchers and policymakers, and then also with firms, right? So trying to sort of get the whole picture of how trade policy works. I have also been fortunate enough to work with the implementation of free trade agreements. So once they are signed, once they are ratified, then how you actually make it happen. So that's my perspective, and that's what I'm hoping that I could add to the conversation here today.
Oh, we definitely look forward to that input, because you're clearly a well of knowledge as to what do we do when the policies are in place and how do we make them actually work. We're keen to meet you, Ben. Over to you.
Okay, thanks. My name's Ben Shepherd. I'm based in New York City. Like Hanna, I work on the policy side of things. So I run a trade policy and development consultancy. It's called Developing Trade Consultants. So a lot of my work is working with governments and international organizations to provide research and advice on the different aspects of trade policy. So that's taken me to Africa a fair amount over the years, both for business and pleasure. I've been going to Africa for over 20 years now, a dozen countries. And in terms of the work that I do specifically in Africa, some of it has been working directly with governments. So there's a number of governments that have been undertaking tasks like reviewing their industrial policy. And so I provide input and advice on that. One of the things I try and do is to bring experience from other parts of the world that have undergone very rapid growth. So, I mean, I think experience in North America and Europe is not particularly useful for many purposes doing trade policy in Africa, but experience in places like East and Southeast Asia, and of course from places within the continent that have been very successful, can be extremely useful when we're looking at ways of reforming policy. So that's something that I try and bring to the table. Then in terms of capacity work specifically, I work with a couple of organizations in Africa. One is the African Economic Research Consortium. So I've recently written something for them on the role of services and trade liberalization in services, specifically looking at the perspective of value chains. And of course, thinking, we have the wonderful Continental Free Trade Agreement that's come into force, but of course, services is part of the, to be considered part of that. So we have a services protocol, but the exchange of market access concessions is still being negotiated. So that was one area that I wanted to work on. Then I also do some training work. So I've done training with the Economic Commission for Africa, working with researchers and consultants in East and West Africa. And then I work with TRAPCA in Arusha, helping to train the next generation of trade policy professionals. So thanks very much to the organisers for inviting me. I'm always happy to come and talk about global trade and what it can do in Africa. I think it's a very exciting topic, and I look forward to getting into the discussion. Thanks.
It's storming here. I hope the storm will not affect my ability to engage on this platform. Finally, if we can get to know more of you, John, welcome.
Thank you very much, Musa, and my co-panelists. And indeed, it's a big honor to be here. And I thank Anne and the team for putting together this second conference. Always happy to collaborate. And my name is John Karegwa. I spent half the time in Kenya and the other time in the Netherlands. I would say I'm an entrepreneur. Came in a bit late. I'd worked with NGOs for about 20 years. And, the challenges of funding told me, I think I'm going to die poor if I'm going to be depending on donors. So let me go into business. And I've never looked back, and business is the way to go. So what do? I have a training company in Kenya and in the Netherlands, mainly targeting nonprofits and business. But apart from that, what actually makes me happy is creating solutions for Africa, with the background of Europe. So I connect African businesses with buyers especially in the Netherlands, and with investors across Europe. So one of the strategies we use is we have a conference in Amsterdam. It's coming up in May next year. It's called Invest in Africa Summit, where you have lots of businesses from Africa coming to meet with the businesses from Europe for the purpose of trade and investments. We also do quarterly trade missions in and out of Africa. We just had one last week with about 20 delegates from South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Eswatini, and Ethiopia, visiting the Netherlands to benchmark and meet Dutch businesses interested in doing business in Africa. And of course, the other thing, all this coming up through these connections is connecting. We realize lots of businesses need capital to scale up. So I connect African businesses with investors from Europe and North America, including businesses looking for trade finance. So that's what I do in a nutshell. Thank you.
I like the fact that you decided there's lots of money you want to spend, so there's lots of money that you have to make. Okay, that's the way we need to go.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So to start our conversation off, this is just an open question to anybody really. Do you think Africa, in her economies and policies, has strategically placed itself to reap the developmental opportunities presented by global trade? Are we rightfully positioned to benefit from the opportunities that are presented in global trade?
Do you want to take that, Ben? It looks like you want to take it.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in if someone's got to go first. Yeah, I would say that's a great question, and my answer would be that no country is constantly rightly positioned to take advantage of global trade, because it's a shifting landscape. It's changing all of the time. So what is right at one period of time constantly needs to be revised and updated as we learn more about how markets are changing abroad, what the dynamics of global trade are doing, and of course, what our own comparative advantages are. So, what does that mean for the position that Africa is in right now? Well, I think one very important thing that Africa has done is the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So, of course, that's, I'm sure been part of the discussion all through the day. But I think that's a really important strategic development, because one thing that we know about trade in Africa is that intra-regional trade, that is to say African countries trading with other African countries, is very low compared with what we see in other regions of the world. And again, not sort of talking about Europe and North America, but talking about East and Southeast Asia and other parts of low and middle income, the low and middle income world. So we know that there's a lot of work that we can do there. So I think that's one very positive thing that's going on. I think the second very positive thing that's going on is, at least in some of the countries that I've been working in, there is a great desire to go further with liberalisation and not do it only on an intra-regional basis, but also look at the trade barriers that we have vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And those trade barriers are really important to think about, because if we want African exporters to be as competitive as possible on world markets, they need to be able to access inputs, which they're often going to want to import. And that's historically been an issue in many countries, where there have been things like foreign exchange rationing, high tariffs on imported machinery, imported intermediate goods, all these sorts of things. And I think we've seen huge changes in that part of the landscape over the last decade or two in the continent. So, I think the positioning that I'm seeing in Africa strategically is very much going in the right direction. I would just emphasize that it's a dynamic process. So we're never going to get it exactly right, and we've got to keep going in that direction even further. I'm very happy, of course, to hear what others think on the question.
I like the fact that you
I'm
highlight continuous
Ben
improvement. Continuous improvement is very necessary for us to remain relevant within the space of trade. So I really appreciate that element. Hanna, do you want to add something onto that?
Yeah, I was just going to give sort of a global perspective on what we see, from the outside looking at Africa. So across the world, we're seeing some nationalist tendencies, and we're seeing that countries that used to be all about liberalizing are turning inwards. And so there's a huge strategic, but also symbolic importance of the AFCFTA getting 54 countries, signing on, taking the leadership, taking the light and running with it and saying, I don't know what you guys are up to, but for us, this is really important, and we're going to do it, everyone, all together. So symbolically, it is huge, and there's a big movement, and really impressive, splendid, I'd say.
Thank you for that, Hanna. I think to start us off, Ben, to what extent are international trade policies and agreements setting Africa up to have strong economic hubs? I know you have somewhat tapped into that on the response that you gave me, but maybe if you could just delve a little deeper on that in terms of there are policies, obviously, with people who we get into trade agreements with and stuff like that. And how does that set us up as Africa to be able to benefit from those agreements, if we are benefiting it to begin with? Or are those agreements happening at the expense of local industry?
Well, I think both of those things can be true up to a certain point. So part of what trade does is to reallocate economic resources, that is to say workers and capital, from activities that we're not particularly good at to activities that we're really good at. And that's the process of specialization by comparative advantage. So a big part of what happens when we enter a trade agreement or when we lower tariffs, reform non-tariff measures, is that there is this movement of resources from one place to another. Some sectors grow, other sectors contract, and that's all part of the process. In terms of this kind of question about hubs and strategy, I think there's a lot that goes into that. Trade agreements, as you said at the outset, are only part of it. So I think the developments that I've been seeing in Africa with regard to trade agreements are very encouraging. I mean, of course, there's a pre-existing network of trade agreements across the continent that predates the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Of course, unifying and harmonizing all of that through the Continental Agreement is a really important step forward in unifying the African market. Now, of course, I think someone earlier mentioned the implementation challenge. I think that is particularly strong in the context of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Getting rid of tariffs is the easy part. That just requires a change of regulation in each country. The hard part is dealing with non-tariff measures. That is to say, this large group of trade costs that make it harder to get things out of countries and into countries than it needs to be. Things like trade facilitation, things like other sorts of border checks, that is to say, not related to paying customs duties, health checks, and all these sorts of things. Now, of course, some of that is entirely necessary and needs to be kept in place. The point is to make it as efficient as possible. So if I compare the experience in Africa with what we see in other parts of the world that have become global hubs, I think it highlights one thing that we really want to work on a lot, which is trade facilitation. and using that in a broad sense. So the WTO has a trade facilitation agreement that all members of the WTO have signed up to. The rate at which that agreement is implemented is dependent on each country's preferences in the case of developing countries. But I think there is a good case for being as ambitious as possible in the implementation of the TFA. Then the second thing that we've got going on is the need for infrastructure. That is to say, it's very hard to be a trade hub if we don't have efficient ports, airports, roads, and rail links. And of course, that's a completely different challenge from a trade agreement. So having a trade agreement is great. And I think it sets in place a really useful and important structure for moving forward. But I'd guess I'd like to rebalance a little and just kind of say that regional cooperation and international cooperation, in particular in areas like critical infrastructure, is also a really big part of the agenda in terms of creating both regional and global hubs in Africa.
Wow, that's very insightful, Ben. There's a definite need for balance if we're trying to make it work. But now I would want to bring this down to grassroots levels, Raquel, where these agreements and these policies benefit the region or the countries at a larger scale. How does this translate at grassroots levels? So to what extent are grassroots communities and cottage industries benefiting from global trade transactions?
Thank you, Master. Yes, the grassroots communities, we need to agree that a lot of them have been.
Is it just me? Can you guys hear her?
No, I can't
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can hear you now, but it's quite faint.
Sorry, I'll put it at maximum. I don't know, maybe.
Rachel, do you have a microphone maybe that you could speak into, like headphones with microphone in it?
I'm speaking directly.
Maybe that's it.
I'm speaking directly to the mic, but I think it must be with the internet now because it keeps fluctuating. Can you hear me?
Not very clearly, no, we can't.
Yeah, we see you well. It's just that the sound seems very.
Let me try to shout a bit more. Is that better?
Subtle, it's a subtle difference, but okay, let's try.
Okay, let's try. All right. So, to what extent are the grassroots communities and cottage industries benefiting from global trade transactions? I believe in the long run, they will actually benefit. But right now, we have to be, like Mango Development, we're trying to be intentional in helping at the grassroots, at the communities, so that they can even grasp this concept of trade beyond the little trade that that is happening. You know, it's been like the goods which are produced, production is really low. So we are trying to intentionally foster participation at the grassroots in the uptakes in innovation and new technologies, which eventually will propel the productivity in the cottage industries. Okay, some ways in which cottage industries in regions can adapt and standardize the production of some products, because when I take an example of some of the products which we are producing, because we are not using big machines, it's really in the rural areas. And even though we have the market, good market for some of our products, it's still a challenge to be able to get that we get a big group of people or a pool of people in this area producing products which are similar, so that we can have a brand out there. Because right now, and also looking at many other people in those areas, the things which they are producing, even if some of them are really good quality, high quality, but we do not have these economies of scale. So in order to benefit in the long run from these trade transactions, I think we will have to step up on the production levels.
It was quite a challenge catching everything you're saying, but I think I caught the essence of it. There's definitely a need for boosting up production so that you are able to meet the demands out there. And I guess capacitation would also play a critical role so that these cottage industries and grassroots communities are able to adequately compete. Can you guys hear the storm? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now that the AFCFTA has been introduced and it has started rolling out, does that mean that the hardest part is done, Hanna? Does it mean that policymakers can now see? Sorry. Does it mean that policymakers can now just sit back and watch the fruits of their labor turn into the riches across the continent?
No. This is sort of tying together with what both Rachel and Ben were talking about, right? So to me, having a trade agreement is sort of like having a gym membership. It's nice to have, but just lying there in your wallet, is not going to make you fit. So the trade agreement, having the trade agreement is of no use until you actually do use it, and firms actually do use it. And it actually trickles down to the grassroots that Rachel was talking about, right? So when you actually have the firms, and not just the big firms, the multinationals, but those small and medium-sized enterprises, the grassroots actually using them. And so this is where the juicy part is. This is where the hard work is. So where we are right now is that these countries have decided, yes, to have a trade agreement and lower tariffs, as Ben said, right? That was the easiest part. So they've decided that there will be a gym, and they have drawn up sort of the lines for it and decided that they are there. But then everything that's needed now is from here to getting to where firms actually use it. And so that's the long road, and that is the juicy part. And this is where we need all the actors. So everybody who's listening in here need to lean forward and make sure that it gets done. Right. And this is what is also super exciting about trade, because what research tells us is important for building economic development. But even more importantly is to get all those stages there that Ben was talking about. So we have tariffs, but then we have non-tariff barriers. And this is everything that stops SMEs from trading. And so that can be anything from what Ben was calling, he was talking about infrastructure, which is just roads and harbors and electricity. And we were talking about, I heard Anne talking about this morning about, just digital connectivity, right? So just having that, being able to do it, like physically able. But my favorite part of this is building what we call the quality infrastructure. And so that's different. So this is about institutions that are needed in the economies to make the whole chain happen, right? So from that producer, or moving from chamber of commerce or chamber of industry, right?
Anna, we are losing you. I'm not sure if it's just my network, but we are losing you.
Okay. I seem to be doing all right with network here. I'm just going to speak slower then, and hope that it works. Yeah, so what we're seeing is that what is really, really important. Can you hear me? Yes? Can you hear me? No? Yes. Okay, good. Is to have these systems and structures in place, to have the institutions, to have the rule of law, so that we have, a standardization bureau. We have a place that does regulation. We have a place that does accreditation. We have custom speaking to regulators. We have, so that whole chain works. And that is where we are now. And that's where I would say that the proof of the pudding is. So is this trade agreement, or any trade agreement that the African signs, is it going to be successful? Well, that depends on what comes now.
I know we've lost you there. we're not hearing the words you're saying anymore.
And if you actually go.
Oh, this is a challenge. Hanna, can you hear me? Okay, well, but I think I caught the gist of what you're saying. But now, if we have all those agreements in place, we have the infrastructure as highlighted by both Ben and Hanna in place, there's still a need for the local businesses or the businesses in Africa to ensure that they themselves.
No, I
was done. Okay.
No, I was done. I was quiet because I was done.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Hanna. I was just saying to you, John, that now that we have all these potential structures in place, we're working on the infrastructure.
Let me stop the video.
We're working on the infrastructure, both digital and physical infrastructure. There's certain work that still needs to be done by the organizations themselves, by the businesses themselves, so that they can take advantage of these opportunities that are coming up due to the AfCFTA or whatever other trade agreements that they may be up there. So what would you say would be of benefit to Africa for the developmental opportunities presented by global trade? What important elements do we have to consider when creating effective strategies and building business models that work?
Oh, well, I think I listened to His Excellency Kelemen 2 weeks ago in the Africa Women in Trade in Cape Town. And we've had this discussion previously with Anne that Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement is welcome, but there are challenges. There are challenges ahead, and he actually reiterated that position that it's not easy. I think he listed about 10 challenges. So you can imagine it started with the challenges, but we hope we'll be able to overcome them. But of course, I think as a policy, we need, and this is what lots of African countries haven't done. About the revolutions that have happened in the West. We need to focus on manufacturing, as a policy, and invest heavily in manufacturing, because lots of goods, for example, that come here in Europe are raw materials, which then get re-exported to Africa at premium prices. So if we can invest in manufacturing, we'll create jobs, create livelihoods, create money for the country, then it'd be easy to trade as opposed to just exporting raw materials to the West. So that's one. I think we need to invest heavily in manufacturing, especially, and I do remember, even long before the agreement was done, I do remember Barack Obama actually advising Africa that if you can trade among yourselves, you don't need to die making deals with Canada, with the US, with the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. I think we need to do that. Tanzania needs goods from Kenya. Uganda needs goods from Ghana, and so on and so forth. And then we give our customers choices from in terms of what to buy from our neighbors. The second thing is, of course, and this is a challenge for some of the traders I connect with markets in Europe, to have quality and quantity. In fact, I previously wanted to be involved in exporting avocado, and then I feared dealing with the farmers who are not able to deliver quality and quantity on time will put me in a lot of trouble. So we need also to invest in qualities and quantities. Once you sign a contract to deliver 2 containers of avocados every week, and you fall short within the first 1 month, the contract is done. So these are some of the standards I think we need to prepare as Africa. And of course, the other thing is, I look at, when you go to the markets, you hear about Italian shoes, Iranian carpets. If we can create niches as Africa, African countries, so that you have a monopoly of producing carpets, or Egyptian rice and so on and so forth. That's creating some of those niches are very, very important. And I know, Netherlands is very, very unique. There's certain district that produce this stuff. The other district produces this stuff. And so when you come to the Netherlands, where do you find good furniture? IKEA, and so on and so forth. So creating niches is very, very important. And of course, our government needs to support manufacturers. We have challenges, for example, in Kenya, where the government, Kenya Revenue Authority, is closing, companies that are not remitting taxes. Instead of they need to support some of those companies to be in business, so that then they're able to remit tax, not shut them down. And I think that's a big issue. So governments need to support manufacturers to produce more and more for regional markets and for international markets. Of course, one of the other issues is of course, the need policies, global policies that support. As you know, I think we're only doing Africa contribution to international trade is only about 1%. So we are doing very, very poorly, and we need to scale up. When I was growing up, when I was a kid, everything in our household in the 70s and 80s was written made from China, whether it was cups, plates. So China saw this a long time ago. Why don't we have the same for made in Kenya, made in South Africa, in China? So these are some of the things we have to do, invest in more and more in manufacturing. Finally, I find the biggest opportunity, at least the biggest challenge, even in terms of doing trade in Africa, is connectivity, connection. I attended the Africa Women in Trade conference 2 weeks ago in Cape Town, and it cost me $2,000 to fly from Nairobi to South Africa. Crazy. It costs much less, $700 to fly from Amsterdam to Nairobi. Try flying from West Africa to East Africa, and it's total madness. In fact, I had a friend who was flying from Sierra Leone to Ghana, and the ticket was $900 on Kenya Airways. I mean, connectivity in terms of infrastructure, in terms of payment systems, in terms of electricity, in terms of finance, in terms of internet, that's what the opportunity is. And unless we do something about these areas, trade will just remain a mirage, in the African context. Yeah, so I think.
I appreciate what you're saying, John. The reality is that trying to trade within ourselves, trying to travel within the region, trying to just, like you said, basic connectivity within the region is a humongous challenge. Yeah. And I think policy has to play some form of role in fixing those issues. There needs to be some policies that ensure that trading from South Africa to Kenya is not so expensive. Traveling from South Africa to Kenya is not so expensive. We need to have infrastructure, both digital, physical, in place. We need to have good connectivity in place, just so that we are strong enough to then compete globally. Because if we fail regionally or within the continent, what are the odds of us then being successful when we want to compete at a global level? So Ben, I just want to check with you now, what policy changes need to take place for all industries to experience significant progress through global trade transactions? Just to let you know, I have hailstorm out here.
Yeah, we can certainly hear the storm. I hope you're okay there. To respond to the question, I mean, I think I can largely pick up things that have already been talked about. So, one, in terms of policies, again, just I think pretty much everyone has said that the Continental Free Trade Agreement is a great starting point, but it is just that, it's a starting point. And I think if we look to experience in other regions, and one that I like to talk about is ASEAN, so the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, you have something pretty similar, which is starting off with a trade agreement, but then going more broadly into things like a connectivity agenda, movements of people from one place to another, air transport, deals with third countries. So ASEAN, of course, is the center of what has now become RCEP, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership involving China, the Southeast Asian countries, Australia, New Zealand, and a couple of others. So I think in terms of building out agendas like connectivity, that's really crucial to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the role of small and medium enterprises. So it's true in pretty much every country, but it's extremely true in Africa that most companies in our economies are small and medium enterprises. And in Africa, as well as in some other parts of the world, a small enterprise can be a sole trader. It can be one person, sometimes running an informal enterprise, sometimes running a formal enterprise. And so a real challenge is how we make trade work for those people. And I think there are people internationally who are working on exactly that challenge. So the International Trade Center in Geneva, its mission statement is all about specifically helping small and medium enterprises enter global markets and be competitive, dealing with the types of challenges that John was talking about a moment ago. You know, if I'm a producer of a fresh product, how do I ensure that I'm meeting my suppliers' requirements, I'm complying with health standards, and of course, I'm doing it all in a reliable and regular fashion. So I think there are international resources out there to try and help. But I think another part of the agenda is developing these links between larger companies that often engage directly in trade. And again, that's true in every country where it's ever been examined empirically. And this kind of universe of smaller companies that provide supplies to those larger companies. If we think of a country like Japan, when it was industrializing after the Second World War, something that they did very, very well was to develop these long linkages from their large trading companies, which were globally competitive and globally successful, through to a whole universe of small and medium suppliers. And in Japan, at the time, we were often talking about 1 and 2 people companies, little family companies producing a particular component part that was going into clothing production or automotive production or electronics, these sorts of things. So I think developing that ecosystem and figuring out what the role of government is to support the development of these linkages is really, really crucial. I think it's a question, by the way, not just for Africa, it's a question for many countries around the world, including high-income countries. How do you get this ecosystem to work for everyone? And so I think those are some of the challenges. And we've heard a lot in the discussion this morning or this evening for you guys about what some of the answers are in terms of the different parts of the policy agenda.
I like what you're saying, Ben. I feel like, and take note, this is a feeling, it might not be true. I feel that, you know, there needs to be an intentional purpose or an intention by government or by some form of body to find out what are these small businesses making and how can we link them to bigger businesses so that we begin to create these ecosystems. Because I refuse to believe that in some cases, these things are just not made locally or regionally. They are, but it's just that we don't know about them, or maybe there's no access to them. And in those instances, then infrastructure again comes into play to make sure that we have access to them. They have the ability to tap into the internet and find out that there are orders for such things and produce those things. So I think there is significant work that needs to be done by local governments to adequately support small and medium enterprises to ensure their sustainability, their resilience, their ability to participate in global value chains, which was a conversation that I was having earlier on today. But now, while those, again, that infrastructure may exist, the reality for African businesses is that in many a time, we need to have access to finance so that we are able to fill out these orders. Should there be an order for me to create little microchips that are going to go into cell phones, I might not have the basics to get my production going. So I'm aware, John, that you have quite some information about access to funding. So for Africa to benefit from the developmental opportunities presented by global trade, what important elements? No, sorry, I've said that one already. Sorry. So finding and securing funding or investors is a real component for African businesses when they look into capacitating, developing, or growing their businesses. Most times, this funding comes from the global north. What are the important criteria to have in place when looking to secure funding from international investors where African businesses are concerned?
I think, let me first of all, acknowledge that Africa needs support, and literally said, I come across friends who are involved in some one trade or another, asking me to send them $500, $200 to process an order, without which, if I do not loan them $500, the order will go and they'll lose money. So if he has to borrow this money to the bank, it will take 2 weeks to process the money, or 1 week, or even 3 days, and he'll lose the order. So given such circumstance, Africa needs support, and accessing capital, for example, in my country, in Kenya, it's not easy. They only give money to government is borrowing heavily from banks. So let's start from that premise that Africa needs support, and lots of businesses are actually struggling, especially post COVID and what is happening now. Lots of businesses are struggling, including even in the Netherlands. There's a trade mission last week, and lots of companies are saying they're struggling. So so they need support. Now, having said that, there are lots of resources for businesses. Businesses, especially in most parts of the West, have run for 300-400 years. So they have excess capital that they loan for as little as 2%. So even if they were to loan that money to Africa for 4-5%, it'd still be an ideal opportunity. And some of the investors that I'm signed to about 10 investors to identify projects for them. They're looking at agribusiness. We all realize the importance of agribusiness during COVID. Everybody needs to eat. So that's a huge opportunity. The next opportunity, of course, is healthcare. We all realize how unstable our healthcare was all over the world, including even in the West. So that's a huge opportunity. There is money for trade finance, basically what you're talking about, bridging capital to be able to trade. There's money for technology. Just last year alone, investors in startups put in about $6 billion. This year so far, they've put in about $4.7. We hope to reach about 8 before the end of the year. So there are lots of opportunities for startups in technology and fintech, mining, renewable energy is also big. Investors are putting money in renewable energy, infrastructure, whether they are PPP projects. There's a huge appetite for that. Affordable housing. There's a big deficit for housing across Africa. I know the Kenyan government has promised to do 250,000 houses in a year, every year for the next 5 years. I hope that can be realized. Logistics, water and sanitation, and basically all the sectors that have to do with, I mentioned earlier, with connectivity, connecting, markets and countries and, internet and so on and so forth. Some of the basic requirements, investors don't want to put in money to ideas, what you call, greenfields. They'll be looking at what traction do you have. Even for most startups, people want to put in money for a scale up. What have you done, and what evidence do you have that our money will grow? So lots of businesses want to put in money to a business that has run for between 2 to 3 years, has records, keeps audited accounts. And then, of course, there are different thresholds for The lowest I know is about 3 million up to even 100 billion. There are people willing to invest even 100 billion. But the standard ticket is $10 million to 100 million. It could either be equity or a debt or a joint venture. Those are all the opportunities. And there's a big movement of investors from all over, from China, from Singapore, from Korea, from Europe, all trying to put in money in emerging markets in Africa. So that's a huge opportunity, especially also even for trade finance, where most traders have challenges, processing orders and so on and so forth. So that's the basic, but I can assure you there's a lot of money and that needs to match the need, and that we are trying to do the connections and support our businesses. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Yes, you have, but I have a follow-up question. Now that we know that there's so much money available, do we have the necessary support structures to ensure that the businesses that need this money have access to this money? Or is it pretty much each man for himself, figure it out and let's see where you get to?
One of the biggest challenges, and to be honest, without due respect to our people, is people want money. I have to be honest, people want money, but they have a challenge even preparing a basic business plan. Some people tell me, why don't you write the business plan for us? And when the money comes, then we can deduct from there. Now, the biggest challenge is in being investor ready. Most businesses are not investor ready. It's a nightmare trying to get documents in place for some of our businesses. And I think that again has to do with the mindset or lack of capacity. I have a deal we are about to close, but this company, a housing project, big housing project, about $200 million. But this company says everything is in place, including approvals. The investor is asking for an off-taker agreement, which they say they have, but they can't find it. They've been looking for this agreement for a month. And so now the investor is telling me, then we're going to give this money to someone else. These are some of the challenges: lack of capacity, and people don't want to invest in capacity. They don't want to spend money to put capacity in place. So these are some of the challenges, including even with our own government. Contracts signed 2 years ago cannot take off because of this and that. So that's an area that the money is there, but of course nobody's going to give you money and you put it in your pocket without proper systems in place. Yeah, so that's a challenge we have, and it's across the board. Whether I'm dealing with clients in Namibia, in Ghana, in Nairobi, it's the same. And the money is there, but we have to put a house in order to receive this money and to utilize it as required.
Thank you for that. If I can bring you in there, Rachel. Now, when we talk about capacitation, how can trade organizations capacitate communities at grassroots levels to benefit from the potential presented by global trade?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll pick up from where my brother has spoken and said there's a fundamental problem in how people approach some of this paperwork and just being ready for funding. And this is where I find that non-governmental organizations can bring complementary skills, knowledge, and commitment to trade development projects. Yeah, instead of focusing on the things which they have been for a long time, in giving people the fish. I think like now with this potential in trade and knowing that we need a mindset shift in Africa, in our approach to businesses, that some of the opportunities we miss out because of how we do the things. Because even I just returned from Kenya the other day, back to Norway, and I was looking at a lot of areas, and I saw actually there's also a lot of funding available for women businesses. Yeah, there are some products intentionally being made to make it easier for women to access loans for their businesses, but they miss out because of really basic things. Or now a good program from the German government, together with 9 other countries, which is called the We Do Project, which I was looking at, and I'm part of here from the Norwegian side. And there's this money that is available for small businesses to actually do something to, if they're creating wealth and if they're sustainable, they're eligible. And because you have to start also from there and grow. And I saw people have really good ideas when I told them, when I was teaching them on sustainability, I really got a lot of innovative ideas. But there was nobody funding for us to do the capacity building for these people in order to really be able to structurize in a way that they will attract funding. We had to do it out of goodwill. So you see, that remains in a very small scale. So if non-governmental organizations, which have been doing a lot of work especially in sub-Saharan Africa, towards achieving the SDGs, if they would just simply strategize a little bit more, so that we have more skills and knowledge transfer towards helping communities to learn more trade ways of facilitating the trade. Also, trade organizations must aim more at harnessing the prosperity that trade can foster to create societies that benefit everyone. Also, bodies like chambers of commerce, they can be useful, because those ones that are really at grassroots level and also international level. So if we could have these conversations really more across, and also getting other stakeholders across the board, because now what we see most of the time, like when we are talking on business, it is mostly the business community, but with these times of climate change, a lot of things stretch across the board. So we need to start fostering more horizontal conversations across the board, and which will enable us to find ways of building the capacity. Thank you.
I was actually going to ask you, Rachel, that are there open lines of communication between these grassroots levels and these chambers of commerce, or with these trade organizations? Because what is not communicated is not known. So are there open channels of communication for such elements to be brought up and addressed?
Yeah, okay. It depends. I think it varies from country to country, but I saw, like in Kenya, the Chamber of Commerce is active really at the ground level up to the village. So I was impressed. And they also, together with one of the banks, curated a nice product for women. It's called She Business Siha Empowered, by this Absa Bank, which is South African, and with the Chamber of Commerce, the local one down there, and really brought a lot of people on board. That was barely last week. So I think these channels of communication are opening, and they're important, because eventually we will be in rural communities more prepared to participate in the Africa continental trade, and eventually also participate more in a bigger scale in the global trade.
Thank you for that. And Rachel, sorry, we're fast running out of time. We have a question that I would like to read out. It says, risk aversion and cost of capital debt is still a significant barrier to investment in Africa. John, what do you think is an ideal way to put out house in order I think it's to put our house in order at a large scale across the continent in order to be investor ready, not only to attract foreign capital, but also mobilize investor capital within the continent?
I think of course, to be investor ready looks like that's a whole new education finance that we need to give businesses, and that's why you find that only the smart ones have access to resources. So it's very, very important that we're able to I don't know who do that, to educate businesses to become investor ready and to also to utilize some of those finances. For example, I'll tell you what, I know for like Rabobank, I think I met one of the directors of Rabobank in Amsterdam. They loan monies for as little as 2% to lots of banks in Africa. And our banks in Africa will loan us money up to 14%. So they make a clear 10% out of Africans, and of course that money goes back to Europe. But of course there are lots of other investors who just want to grow their money even for as little as 1 or 2%. So we need to do a lot of training to assist businesses to become investor ready. Even just creating sensitization in terms of where the money is, that's also very, very important to know where the money is and what kind of money is available and what are the terms, and then how to utilize it to be able to expand businesses, create jobs, and create livelihoods. That's where I see it. I think it's a whole new development. It's happening, but there's a way it can be structured better to benefit more and more businesses, especially the small and middle enterprise need that support in a huge way. Yeah.
I know I still had one more question for you, Hanna, but we have fast run out of time. If I could ask you guys for your one piece of advice that you would be able to give to, especially to small and medium-sized enterprises out there, in terms of how they can take advantage of the opportunities that are presented by global trade, what advice would that be? I will start with you, Hanna.
That's a difficult one for me, being a policy advisor and not even in Africa. So I feel like I'm not really posed to take the question, but it would be to get your house in order, get your papers ready, and then hang out at places like this, like Anne's putting together, right? Find your network of people who work with similar things, learn as much as you can, and be bold.
Sure. Thank you for that, Hanna. I hope in Africa, they say those who have ears have heard. Rachel?
Wow. Yeah, I think I'll just echo what Hanna has said, that we just need to put our house in order, hang out in the right places. Let's not underestimate the value of these networking events and knowledge exchange. And being very much in the rural spaces, where that is where my heartbeat is to say, those are agri communities. So I feel like it's time that our governments really facilitated diversification of its agricultural products so that we can add value to our primary commodities, because for a long time trade has been with just commodities. We need to start preparing the goods, producing economic goods. This brings another area that I'm passionate about, which is the diaspora. Yeah, we need to utilize, we need to foster engagements with diaspora, because they play a very key role even in how Africa is branded to the world. For example, we have had our brand, our poster child for Africa is what the NGOs branded us. I have nothing against them, but it is this picture of poverty that was posted to the world. So in one hand, we want to beg money with poverty and show this poor child who is suffering, who is full of mucus. And on the other hand, we are saying we want to produce consumption goods that go out to the world. Yeah. So we really have to decide, what is Africa about? If we are taking the image of trading and you want to export consumable goods, then we have to start rectifying this image, this false image, and bringing the real image of Africa outside there and branding Africa in a new way. And that we can only do, first of all, as we, the African children. Thank you.
True. I really, really like what you said. We need to take control of our own narrative, put out the story that we want to put out there, and make everyone else believe that story, because that story is the truth. Ben?
Yeah, thanks. I'll be really quick. I have two things that I want to say to wrap up. One is organize and use institutions. So we've talked at different points through the session about the roles of chambers of commerce. I think it's absolutely crucial. So if we talk about it more broadly, we're talking about what are called business support organizations. It can be a chamber of commerce, it can be a sectoral group of producers, it can be an informal network, whatever form it takes. Use those institutions to do the sorts of things that John was talking about. We know that investment, access to finance is a crucial constraint. So working together to overcome some of those difficulties can be really productive. The second thing that I want to put out there is something that we haven't mentioned, so I'm just going to leave it for everyone to think about, and that's the role of digital marketplaces. Now, obviously, there's an issue with connectivity, access to infrastructure. However, there is excellent evidence internationally that digital marketplaces make it much easier for small and medium enterprises to engage in trade. And it's a sector that is very vibrant in Africa. There are over 100 digital marketplaces on the continent. So I think that is somewhere with great potential. And again, it's about organizing and getting your government this time to work for you by supplying the connectivity that businesses need. Thanks.
You brought up something that we discussed in an earlier conversation about digital tools. Those are very necessary for us to compete in the global space. John?
There's a story I was telling someone a few days ago, who coincidentally, the person I was talking to coincidentally was in South Sudan 10 years ago when I was there. I kind of one day got tired of Kenya and decided I'm just going to catch a bus to South Sudan and find out what opportunities are there. And it was the longest journey in my life. In fact, at some stage, I thought, I don't want to go. How can I just drop off this bus and just return home? But when I got there, I didn't even know where to start. There were lots of opportunities. And my message to lots of business people is cross the border. Cross the border, you'll find something that you can provide that other people do not see. Cross the border. That's my first message. Let me tell you, the returning home with dollars or with euros is the greatest thing that can happen to a trader when you're at the exchange bureau. So cross the border. The next one is collaborate. Collaborate is a new capital. If you cannot provide for an order, you can team up with someone who has the goods or who has the capital, and you share even if a small percentage. That's where you're going to grow to be able to service all your orders. Collaborate as much as possible. Collaborate is a new capital. Of course, I don't need to talk about a digital, but go digital. You are able to, for example, what I do is I log off my laptop in the Netherlands, and 8 hours later, I'm in Nairobi, I log in and continue working as if I've not moved. So let's go digital. You can supply anything online. You can buy things online. Let's go digital. And I think for Africa, I think that's a huge opportunity we are not exploiting. And I find, there's a company that supplies food deliveries in the Netherlands. It's called House Bezorg. And during COVID, the meal sales worth of 490 million euros, just delivering food. And they're just brokers. They do not cook any food. They're just brokers. The same, with Amazon, what is happening? Africa, wake up and let's go digital. And that's where the money is. My message. Thank you.
Wake up, Africa. The time is now. Thank you so much, guys. This has been a very interesting conversation, despite all the challenges with the storm that has grown, the network challenges. It really was a very informative session. I trust that those who were listening into the information that you guys had to share learned a lot from it. So I'm very grateful for this time. And again, we want to thank you, Anne, for this opportunity to be able to share this information and to capacitate Africa so that we definitely create the Africa we want, Agenda 2063. Thank you. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Musa, for your great moderation and starting that interesting conversation. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rachel, very much. You know, it was very interesting because everyone came from a different perspective, right? Policy, research findings, industry practices, rural, you know, city. It was quite interesting for me, and I believe a lot of the audience felt that and really recognized that global trade can be a catalyst for development in Africa. And again, remembering what you ended with saying, the power of networks, knowledge exchange is very important. So again, thank you, Musa, for that great moderation and highlighting what is very important here.